Hey everyone, welcome back to You Talk. We listen, and thanks as always to the OtisWho network for sponsoring us. Today we're going deep, as the name suggests, on something that's been, I think, safe to say, been kind of freaking out a lot of people lately, especially folks in the corporate world. We're talking about the murder of Brian Thompson, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare.
Yeah, it's a case that's really captured the public's attention, and a lot of you have reached out specifically about one detail in particular, the suspect's connection to Atlanta. That's what we're going to try to unpack today. It's a detail that's, well, it's intriguing, to say the least.
It is intriguing. I mean, we know the basics, right? Thompson was shot and killed outside that Hilton Midtown Hotel in New York City. But what's so strange is that the suspected gunman then boarded a Greyhound bus that originated in Atlanta.
Right, and we can't overlook the fact that he used a silencer. That really suggests the level of premeditation. This wasn't some kind of, crime of passion or a random act. It was a hit, a planned hit, and that makes it a whole lot more disturbing.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. You start to think about it. If it was targeted like that, then the question becomes, who would want Thompson dead? And what is the significance of Atlanta in all of this? Was that just a random starting point? Or was there something more to it?
Well, initially there was some speculation that the suspect might have fled back to Atlanta, but the NYPD has made it clear that there's actually no evidence to support that.
So was he ever even in Atlanta?
Well, that's the big question right now. It's totally possible that he boarded that bus somewhere else along the route. And figuring out exactly where he got on, well, that could be a huge break in the case for investigators. It might give them some clues about his motive, about potential links to Thompson, or maybe even tell them if he had any accomplices.
I imagine that not knowing must be really unsettling, especially for folks in Atlanta who rely on Greyhound to get around. I mean, can you imagine that feeling? Knowing that someone capable of something like this could have been sitting right next to you?
Yeah, this case has definitely tapped into a kind of a collective fear, and not just in Atlanta either. We're seeing it in boardrooms across the country too. There's been this huge uptick in security measures across the health insurance industry. It's like a ripple effect from this one event. Even UnitedHealthcare itself, they shut down their investor conference right after Thompson's death.
Yeah, I guess it's a harsh reminder that no one, no matter how powerful or how protected they might seem, is really immune to this kind of thing.
That's right. And it really raises some questions about executive security in general. Are we doing enough to protect these high-profile figures? And does this case mean we need to rethink how we approach security? Not just for CEOs, but for anyone in a position of influence.
Those are some really good points. I mean, we've seen violence against public figures before, but there's something about this case with its mix of corporate intrigue and that mysterious Atlanta connection that feels especially unnerving. Makes you wonder, are we seeing a shift towards more targeted attacks, attacks that are more planned out and calculated?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important for all of us to think about what this means for our own safety, too. Are there lessons we can all take away from this case, whether we're in the corporate world or not? How can we assess and maybe mitigate our own risks?
Yeah, that's something for everyone to think about for sure. So let's recap what we know so far. We've got a targeted attack, a suspect who took a Greyhound bus, and a whole lot of unanswered questions about his motives and where he is now.
Right, and the fact that investigators haven't released any information about a possible motive just adds to the mystery. I mean, what could have driven someone to do something like this? Was it corporate espionage gone bad? Was it a personal vendetta? Or was it something else entirely? These are all questions we're going to be digging into as we continue our deep dive. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts based on what we've talked about so far? What do you think the motive could be?
Honestly, it's a puzzle. And that lack of a clear motive, at least publicly, is a big part of what makes this case so intriguing. What could possibly push someone to that extreme? And then you add in the Greyhound element. Did he choose that deliberately to make himself harder to track?
Well, those are definitely some of the questions that investigators are trying to answer. And those answers could have major implications not only for understanding this case, but also for how we approach security in the future, not just in the corporate world, but everywhere. But before we dive into all of that, let's take a closer look at that Greyhound journey itself. What do we know about where the suspect went and what remains unclear?
Okay, good point. Let's break down that Greyhound route and see what it can tell us.
So yeah, this whole Greyhound bus route thing, it really adds this extra layer of complexity to the whole investigation. It kind of shows how connected everything is these days and how someone could just travel across state lines pretty much anonymously.
Makes you think of those old movies, right? With the fugitive on the run just disappearing into the crowd.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes things a lot harder for law enforcement. I mean, think about it. They're trying to solve a crime that spans multiple states, potentially hundreds of miles. It's a massive area to cover and so many potential leads to chase down.
So, okay, we know the bus started in Atlanta, but where did he actually get on? Did he have any ties to the city, or was it just a random starting point to throw investigators off the scent? I mean, was there something specific about New York that drew him there?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's probably keeping the folks at the NYPD up at night. I'd imagine they're combing through every scrap of surveillance footage they can find, from bus stations along the route to rest stops, even traffic cameras. Anything to help them piece together a timeline and figure out exactly where he boarded and if he talked to anyone along the way.
Like a digital trail of breadcrumbs, except instead of leading to, a delicious pie, it leads to a potential killer.
That's a good way to put it. Every little piece of data, every timestamp, every grainy image from a security camera could be the key to cracking this case wide open.
It's interesting how this case kind of brings together these two completely different worlds. The high-stakes world of corporate leadership and the everyday reality of traveling by bus.
Yeah, you've got Thompson at the very top of a major company, and then you have this suspect potentially choosing to travel in a way that's often associated with anonymity,
Yeah.
just blending into the background noise of everyday life. It's almost like he's deliberately trying to disappear, at least for a little while.
It is unsettling, right? Because it makes you question that sense of control and predictability, what we all kind of crave. If someone could just vanish like that, even for a short time, what does that say about the systems we rely on to keep us safe?
It definitely exposes some vulnerabilities for sure. I mean, even with all the technology we have these days, all the cameras everywhere, there are still ways for people to operate outside of those systems. In this case is a pretty stark reminder of that.
It is a chilling thought, but I don't think we can let fear control our lives either. It's about finding that balance between acknowledging the risks and still, you know, living our lives.
I think you're right. It's not about being afraid, but about being informed and aware. It's about understanding the world we live in and making smart choices about our safety and the safety of our loved ones.
It's about talking about these things openly and honestly, even when they're uncomfortable. We can't just ignore issues like violence and crime, even if they make us feel uneasy.
Exactly. By facing these realities head on, we can start to work towards a safer and more secure society. This case has definitely sparked those conversations, and it's up to all of us to keep them going. So, where do we go from here? We've got an ongoing investigation and a lot of unanswered questions. What happens next?
Well, the NYPD is definitely on the case. They're doing the hard work, analyzing the evidence, talking to witnesses, following up on every lead, no matter how small it might seem.
That's good to hear that they're not letting anything slip through the cracks. But while we wait for them to do their thing, what can we do as individuals to stay safe and informed? Are there any lessons we can take away from this case, regardless of what we do for a living or our social status?
Well, I think staying informed is always a good idea. Following reliable news sources and official statements from law enforcement is the best way to get accurate information. Beyond that, it's about being more aware in our everyday lives, paying attention to our surroundings, being careful about who we share personal information with, and trusting our gut instincts if something feels off. They might sound simple, but those are powerful tools we all have.
You're absolutely right. It's about being proactive without letting fear take over. It's a delicate balance, but a crucial one. And this case, as it continues to unfold, serves as a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a safer and more resilient society.
We are all interconnected, and as this case shows, the actions of one person can have consequences that reach far and wide. But it's not just about reacting to these events, it's about actively working to create a world where these kinds of tragedies are less likely to happen.
I think you put it perfectly. It's about shifting from a reactive mindset to a proactive one. It's about understanding that we all have a responsibility to create a safer and more informed world, and that our individual actions, no matter how small they may seem, can contribute to that. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's bring it back to the case at hand. We've talked about the fear and anxieties this case has triggered, but what about the human cost? Brian Thompson was more than just a CEO. He was a husband, a father, a colleague, a friend. His death has left a void that extends far beyond the corporate world.
It's true. It's easy to get caught up in all the details, trying to figure out who did it and why. But yeah, you're right. At the end of the day, a life was lost. Brian Thompson was a real person with a family and friends and colleagues who were all dealing with this loss.
Yeah, and that grief and sorrow, it reaches so many people, not just those closest to him. This case has really struck a chord with a lot of people, and I think it's a reminder that even in the corporate world, a world that can sometimes feel very detached and impersonal, there's a human element that we can't forget about.
Yeah. It really drives home the point that behind every headline, behind every news story, there are real people whose lives are forever changed by events like this.
This case, it's going to stay with people for a long time, not just those who knew Brian Thompson personally, but anyone who's ever thought about, the fear of violence or how fragile life can be or just how seemingly random these kinds of events can feel.
It makes you think about how interconnected we all are. The choices we make, the actions we take, they can have consequences that we might never fully grasp.
And as we move forward, both individually and as a society, I think it's really important to hold on to that sense of empathy, that commitment to compassion, and that determination to create a world where these senseless acts of violence are less likely to happen.
It's a sobering thought, but I also think there's hope there. Even in the face of tragedy, there's always the possibility for healing, for positive change, for a renewed focus on what truly matters.
I agree. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with that sense of hope, that belief in our ability to overcome even the most difficult challenges, and that commitment to creating a world where tragedies like this are less and less frequent, a world where justice and the value of human life are at the forefront of everything we do.
It's been great to explore this case with you. It's a complicated one for sure. And as we move forward, let's do it with open minds and compassionate hearts and a shared goal of making the world a safer and more just place for everyone.
Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time to listen and engage with these tough topics, and we encourage you to keep the conversation going. Ask questions, seek understanding, and let's work together to create a world where violence and fear have less of a hold and where hope, compassion, and justice can flourish.
And remember, your voice matters. Use it to speak up for change, to support those who are hurting, and to spread positivity that goes beyond your own circle.
We can all make a difference.
Thanks for listening.